Roger, we've included an extract from When Colts Ran in The Invisible Thread, and at its core it's about the friendships and bonds between boys and men. And parts of the novel were published originally as short stories, and I believe that you didn't actually see it as being a novel when you first started work on it. So can you tell us about how it progressed and actually took on its final shape?
Well, I didn't want to publish a book of short stories or long short stories or whatever because of the interconnections. I could see, even though I wrote 3 or 4 or even 5 of those sections unrelated to each other and not necessarily seeing them as related, I suddenly saw after a couple of years that a character under a different name was actually the same character and so on. So I drew those parts together and then filled it out, and almost as a kind of desperate name for it, called it a novel. But I think, and whether it's a true novel or not, it's up to the reader, I suppose. But in terms of its origins in imagination, it wasn't conceived as a sort of a single imaginative entity, which is the way a novel usually works. But I guess, you know, you can build a house from inside out and put the roof on first, maybe. That's the way it went.
And I mean, this book actually has its origins even much further back, because 10 years ago you had written a book that was almost published, and it must have got quite far because I've seen a cover image of it, and you pulled the plug on that at the last moment, and that had the central character who was Colts from When Colts Ran.
Yeah.
So that must have been an incredibly difficult decision. Why did you make that, and how did that come about, and how did it affect the development of When Colts Ran?
Well, I think that I said to my publisher at the time, you know, look, really, she was very happy with the novel, and obviously it got to the stage of having the cover designed and all that kind of thing. Maybe I sat down to write the blurb and thought, this isn't making sense, and I just felt it wasn't alive for me. And all through the writing, I'd somehow felt I knew it was based on a factual story. And I knew the ending of the story, and I think that if you know the ending when you're writing something, it can be a dead hand. I felt that. So then when I was putting together When Colts Ran, I had the freedom to really draw the bits that were alive out of that and link them up, and I loved doing that. And hopefully, for me anyway, it brought those parts of When Colts Ran alive.
So when you made that decision at the time, were you very clear that it was absolutely the right thing, or was there still some doubt in your mind?
No, I knew it was the right thing. Yeah, I knew I wasn't happy. It's just, you know, authors can publish, you know, when you've had a few books published with a reputable publisher who's supporting you, you can get away with doing something that's second best. And I'd sort of, you know, for the best reasons in the world, for everybody concerned, it's not seen as second best, it's seen as okay, but not perhaps, you know, as good as your best. And I think that it's finally up to the author to make that decision on, look, this isn't quite right, and do that. Because it doesn't help you in any way to publish for the sake of publishing, I think.
Now, there's a very obvious love of the land in all of your work, and we're sitting here in the place where you write with a beautiful view out of the window. So, you know, I feel as we're arriving here, you know, you can see that landscape that's in your books. But I read that when you finished writing When Colts Ran, or after it came out, that you felt that you're now finished, fictionally speaking, with those landscapes, which you've been writing about in the past 8 novels. So tell us about why you felt compelled to write about those landscapes and why you feel that you're actually now finished with them.
Right. Well, beware a writer that makes a black and white declaration. I'd say. But, I do feel in some ways I've kind of, you take a big wide circle in your life and you come back to something that, you know, was there at the start. And for me at the start, I was born at Young, not far north of Canberra, and it was a long way north years ago, but it's got a lot closer now. We actually lived in a little town called Bribri, which is about 40 kilometres northwest of Young. Young was the nearest hospital. And I can remember my earliest memories of of sitting on the veranda of the house where we lived and looking out over a paddock of dry grass, or maybe it was wheat stubble towards a distant creek, and hearing the sort of crackle of heat and chirp of insects and distant cries of birds and so on. And you as a young baby almost, you make those attachments, and they've lasted all my life, even though I've kind of, you know, lived in the country up till secondary school, and then in cities and done various jobs and so on. And I was 40 before I could move to the country full time. I always found that deep satisfaction in living somewhere like, you know, where I am now. Sort of not quite in the bush, but near the bush, and enjoying all those things about the landscape without actually having to make a living from it as a farmer, like my brothers did. Yeah, I kind of, you know, it's like squeezing a grape and getting as much out of it as possible. Maybe I've reached the end of that, you know, maybe I'm being a bit superstitious.
Now, The Invisible Thread isn't about Canberra, but inevitably some of the pieces that we've included do take it as its setting, and yours is one of those. And I mean, I think it expresses an idea about Canberra that it's just so perfectly put that I want to just read a little snippet from the extract that we've included. And this is Major Dunk Buckler speaking. "They got the one thing right in this country that brands this country like nothing else does: space. They put space into a town. There's a lot of space between everything here, and that's the idea. It's a fact. If you've got space, you've got time." And to me, that just seems to so perfectly sum up Canberra, you know, that idea of space and that time to reflect. Is that what Canberra means to you?
Well, it does in a funny way, and I'd never thought of that until relatively recently when New Zealand friends come over here, pick them up at the Canberra airport and give them a quick hour, what they call a tiki tour of Canberra. And they always say, "Where are the people? Where are the buildings?" You know? And I suddenly realised that, can this have been deliberate, you know, that so much space was left in Canberra, you know, and you can see out to the hills around it wherever you go and so on. And it certainly, I'd say that aspect of it was not deliberate, but it's symbolically, it kind of is what Australia has, you know, like Australia has this immensity of space. I mean, you feel it everywhere, and you particularly feel it in Central Australia and Western Australia, you know, it's another universe. So I put those words into the mouth of that character.
Now, I'd like to talk more broadly about your own writing. And you started writing very early, but you didn't show anybody any of your writing until you were in your 20s. So why did it take you so long, and what was it that made you finally able to do that?
Well, I think that's all part of, you know, developing identity as a person. You know, you dare to be something that you feel you couldn't possibly be. And in my case, that was a writer, and there was no one there to train me. In fact, there were plenty of people to discourage me, because teachers certainly didn't encourage writing in inverted commas. They encouraged something called composition and grammar and spelling and so on. You know, I just kept quiet about it, and also I felt, you know, it was a bit pretentious to be a writer. It was poetry that I was interested in then, and so I kind of stayed inside that little shell.
Well, now you're obviously considered to be one of Australia's greatest writers, so what does that kind of broad recognition mean to you?
Well, I'll take away that last sentence you said, because you do feel as a writer, you know, who the hell is reading me, you know, like, because readers can be very shy about saying something to authors. They don't realise that an author is, you know, is a thirsting person in the desert. You know, you spend all this time writing all those words and shaping something up, and you really do want somebody to say something to you. So, what is being established, what is being accepted, and so on. Yes, you can do it from your publication records, but you never quite feel it yourself.
Yeah, I love that idea of thirsting in the desert. So what's the most memorable or meaningful feedback that you've ever got from a reader then?
A letter. A letter from a reader it's always memorable. Yeah. Who the hell is this, you know, somebody writing from a distant location who's just found your book somewhere, and usually second hand or someone's passed it on or forced it on them and they haven't read it for years, and then they picked it up and they apologise for not reading it before and all that kind of thing. They're all memorable, all of those connections, you know, that you can be lucky enough to have what is essentially a private, something that's imagined privately, like your own vision of something. It's like a theatrical production, you know, you've done all the behind the scenes work and so on, but someone's come along and seen it and said, you know, I was moved by it, or, you know, it seemed real. I love it when people say it seemed real, because it's not real.
Mm. And you've won lots of the major awards, so does that also, do you find that affirming as well?
Yes, I do, but, you know, you can always have a little whingy whine, you know, why can't I sell more books? Why don't awards sell more books? Which is pathetic, really, because, you know, I have a friend, Irma Gold, who says to me, you know, I want your awards, and I say to him, I want your book sales. You know. But yes, it is wonderful to win those things, and I'm very pleased and proud, and it is satisfying, you know. And I won the Miles Franklin with Ballad of Desmond Cale, and then it was up for contention with When Colts Ran, and I honestly, I know it's hard to believe an author when they say this, but it was true, I did not mind whether I won it or not. I'd won it once, and it was somebody else's turn, and I was very happy for somebody else to win it. You know, that shows that these things can be satisfying.
Do you find that it puts a certain kind of pressure on you, having won those awards, when you come to write a new book?
No, it doesn't. No. I put so much pressure on myself. I don't feel I'm ever going to be able to. When I start a book, even when I'm close to the finish, I'm thinking this is never going to work. That's my struggle, you know, to find the right words for the right story, the right situation, the right characters. You know, it always seems just a little bit out of reach. So I don't think I could ever be complacent that way.
You mentioned before we started the cameras rolling that you feel like you've got less drive than you used to.
Yeah, less ambition to do it again. You know, maybe I feel, you know, my 9th novel is being published next year. And it may just be cross fingers, knock on wood kind of superstition that I can't go on forever, so I better pull back now kind of thing. But I don't particularly want to. But who knows?
One final question. What do you hope readers take away from your work?
The same thing that I look for when I read a new book. You know, I look for being drawn in, and that usually doesn't begin until 50 or 60 pages in and the whole thing starts moving. So they have the patience to be drawn in and listen to my voice and get used to it. You've almost got to, with every book, you've almost got to teach the reader how to read it. So be drawn in, to be bewildered in the best way, you know, to feel, because what's the point of writing a book about something that everybody already knows about, you know? What's the point of writing it yourself if you already know everything about what you're writing? You know, it's a discovery as you go along. So the reader must have that, you know, sense of bewilderment that comes with every beginning to a discovery, and then the satisfaction of all the different parts coming together, and being, you know, encapsulated in the ending. And the most satisfying books I read, and I've recently read two new Australian novels, which both made me feel I wanted to start reading them again immediately. And sometimes people have said that to me about my books. That's actually a pretty wonderful thing to hear from a reader. And so all of those things, that's what and also a kind of a value in that the Australian landscape, the rural experience, can be as profound as any other way of kind of putting your paintbrush putting your paint onto the canvas kind of thing. I get depressed sometimes when I feel, oh, your book's out. Like it happened to Last Miles Franklin. I was shortlisted for last year that there was an outcry because 3 males were on the list, and it was said, yes, each of them are wonderful writers and they've written wonderful books. Well, the people who made these criticisms actually, they certainly hadn't read my book. I know that. You can tell from the way people talk about these things. They had a concept of what the book was without reading it. That's extremely disappointing, and it's sad that people who want to be, kind of be in the intellectual vanguard would have those attitudes. But overall, it's that satisfaction that you've perhaps written something that will retain its freshness and newness for quite a while.